The topic of today's seminar is really intriguing for many reasons, because connecting the freedom of expression and access to media with the guarantee for political pluralism, the access to political and public arena, is one crucial topic in many countries, of course in Western countries, but also in countries in transition. I remember when I was at that time a young diplomat, and I was in Chile. It was the last year of Pinochet in power, and what Western countries did in this occasion is to set up a sort of package to help the opposition to create their own newspapers, their own televisions, because this is important. If you cannot reach the audience, you cannot pass on the message that you want to share with the electorate, with the citizens. So the problem is that today this is a matter not only of establishing the rules, but also to access, to grant substantial access to these tools to all the political forces involved in the political and electoral struggle. So I think that this would be a refreshing contribution from you to a very interesting subject, and without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Cristina Giachi, who is Deputy Mayor of Florence, and who just came out of an electoral campaign. So, and by the way, congratulations for the success. I think that we will go on with a very strong cooperation that we already have with you, with the municipality of Florence, and with the city of Florence, with the society of Florence, with the University of Florence, because this is one of our missions, to be connected also with the territories and to cooperate with you all. So thank you, Cristina, for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pasquale. Good morning, everybody, and welcome, especially to Professor Frank La Rue. We are happy and honored to have you here and to host this presentation on a really important subject. Well, we are coming from an electoral campaign, so we know how important is the thing we are facing today, and how delicate downs expression, freedom of expression, and using the media. So I think, I hope that Florence will be able in the future to host this kind of presentation again, and to candidate Florence as a permanent place where to host this kind of presentation. I would love to work on this, and I hope we do together with the Institute. We are working together in these years, and I think we made a good job, and I hope we will do it in the future. Yeah. So welcome everybody, and well, let's have a good job.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. It's a big honor for me to be here.
Sorry, it's your turn.
I'll be very brief. Santiago Canton, I'm the director of the Human Rights Program of the Robert F. Kennedy Center, and I'd like to thank the university and the Vice Mayor of Florence to host this event as well. I've known Frank for probably more than 20 years, and I think it's important to say a little bit about his work in the past, because it put in a framework what the presentation he's making today. Frank comes from Guatemala, and during the very difficult years of the conflict in Guatemala, when exercising the right to freedom of expression was the difference between life and death, Frank was very active defending human rights in Guatemala during the 80s and 90s. But then he also had the opportunity to work on human rights in Guatemala from the government side, which was giving a completely different perspective. And after that, also working on human rights and specifically freedom of expression in a multilateral organization. So he really has all the best ingredients to do the work that he's doing right now. And it has been an honor and a privilege for us at the RFP Center to work with him and to be able to present the report. But also he worked with the RFP Center back in the 80s and 90s, so he's part of our family. So I know the work of Frank from my prior work also on freedom of expression, where he was an enormous support for us. And I know that all the reports that he's been working on have been of excellent quality, and he's working during the last 30 years has raised the bar for all the people working on human rights all over Latin America and throughout the world, thanks to the World Academy. So thank you very much, Frank, and we are looking forward to it.
From the center, let me just simply say that we are really thankful to Frank to be here again, and thanks to all the organizers and also the financiers of the collaboration. Let me say that the center was born in December 2011. The first major thing we did was with Frank, the important conference on hate speech and freedom of expression. And I think that was a good start to have a look at this center financed by the European Commission with a mandate in Europe, but to have a look around what really is happening and to have a very open mind. Let me say that this event today, in which Frank tell us about the elections and media and his analysis of the situation, is also very timely for us because we are in the making of this European project, the Media Monitoring Pluralism project for the European Commission. We are analyzing it in 9 countries, and we have done most of the analysis, political science analysis during the electoral campaign. So we have a specific space for the electoral campaign issues. So when we come up with the report for, this is an experimental report for 9 countries that will come out in the next month, and then we hope to do the other 21 European countries next year, but there will be a special focus on electoral campaign, so I think it's very, very interesting for us to Frank report to be able to also learn and use this very wider experience that we can give us today. So thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank the Deputy Mayor of Florence. It's a big honor to be in this city. This city is not only the seat of the Renaissance, but I think it's also the seat of politics in Italy today, the future, the political future of Italy, everyone says. So it's a double pleasure to be here, not only a beautiful city, but also to look at the future of the country. And I also thank the European University Institute for this invitation. It is my second time, and I would certainly like to be invited again, hopefully in the future. And I'm very pleased to see the program on the monitoring of media pluralism. That's one of the big issues that I have been focusing on. And in this report, it plays a key role. It has in all of my reports been an essential element. And finally, I'd like to also thank the Robert Kennedy Human Rights Foundation and Santiago, Canton, Andrea Galindo, and everyone else who works at the center, who has been a great support from the 80s and 90s in Guatemala to today, doing this wonderful work and actually doing it from Florence as well. So this is crucial. Let me say that first of all that the topic of this report was done with a little bit of controversy. People used to think of freedom of expression related only to media and journalists in general. And interestingly enough, when I came into the mandate, I made the purpose of looking at freedom of expression from the broadest possible perspective. I come from a very small country, but with a very strong cultural diversity. In Guatemala, we have, besides Spanish as a common language, we have 22 different Mayan languages and a strong ethnic sort of culture of the Mayan ancestral Mayan population of the country. And of course, we have been suffering discrimination and hate speech for a long time, so for me that was a very important topic. But also the defense of cultural diversity and cultural expressions as one of the richest elements of the world in forms of freedom of expression. And there were reports like hate speech that was very difficult because you want to focus on the positive and not on the negative. But again, this was a result of what was the debate in the world at the moment. This was after the tragic events in Oslo, and it was very important, and actually there was very big interest in Norway, but around the world to handle tragic issues like that. How can xenophobia or speech of that nature generate such levels of violence, and how can states deal with the prevention? And as a matter of fact, after my report, the High Commissioner followed it up with the Rabat Plan of Action, which was a consultation around the world, an official consultation by the High Commissioner with states. So I was able to participate in both. But the most important aspect, I think, was a procedural aspect. I was able to deal with these topics by holding regional consultations. And every single report I did from 2010, from the Internet Freedom of Expression reports, were also part of the dialogue. I couldn't say were the result of the consultations because not necessarily everything in the consultations was used, but it gave me the feeling of what was happening in the world. What was important was to break away from the four walls of the Palais de Nation and leave Geneva and go out to the world. So we, in this report, for instance, on electoral communication, we had a Southeast consultation in Bangkok, we had an African consultation in Johannesburg, we had a European consultation in Madrid, we had a Latin American consultation in Rio de Janeiro, and we had a couple of technical meetings of experts, one in Washington, one in Central America, with Central America and Mexico, just a small group of experts coming together. And it was very clear for me that the time was right, because of all the prior consultations, everyone was beginning to talk about elections and communication and transparency. Let me say just 2 words about the report and also what we're working on for the next report, which I will not present myself, but I leave a draft for my successor. The idea of this report was to draw on the 2 aspects, the 2 dimensions of freedom of expression. But the most important one, obviously, was the pluralism and diversity, exactly what we're looking at here. Why? Because in reality, what we're talking about, and I always say this, is when we're defending freedom of expression, we're also defending democracy. Only a truly democratic society can guarantee fully freedom of expression. Authoritarian regimes tend not to like people to speak out, or to have diverse opinions, or to be able to criticize public policies or public officials. So democracy and freedom of expression go hand in hand, and this is why the link is very easy. My report is not on elections or electoral systems. My report is on communication and freedom of expression, but linked to that. So the first element I propose is that some issues that we defend all the time become even more relevant in an electoral period. The principle of diversity and plurality that UNESCO established many years ago is valid all the time to guarantee full information and access to information to society, but also to guarantee freedom of expression of all sectors with a pluralism of ideas and opinions. But in elections, they are particularly important because elections have to be pluralistic in order to be truly democratic. So it has a double meaning. And in that sense, first, we must guarantee diversity of media, which means we can have commercial media, we can have community media, we can have, I added a 4th, ethnic media, understanding that of specific media of minorities, especially in broadcasting. And the 4th is public media, as long as it's independent public media and not controlled by any party or any particular government. And it is the balance of all the forms of communication, from the local community forms of communication to the national networks of television or radio, or now to the use of internet. I must say, and this is interesting, that although I have written a lot about internet and freedom of expression, and about the defense of universality of the use of the internet and the need to defend the human rights focus and the diversity that we should have in internet, and also the neutrality of internet. It is still true, and this I confirmed in every single continent of the world, that national elections are not determined by internet yet. The strongest case for internet was probably in the US, was the elections of Obama, who had a very important role with internet. But in the rest of the world, the percentage is 80% of the population still makes their decisions based on television coverage, not even radio or written press. So ironically, although we're in the beginnings of the massive use of the new technology, television is still the most important controlling aspect of communication in elections. That doesn't mean it applies to all other topics. So it's true to me that in telecommunications, in broadcasting, in television and radios, where there should be a particular emphasis on diversity, plurality, and given the fact that the state owns the frequencies, it's a big opportunity for states to assume the responsibility on using those frequencies responsibly and wisely, and how they're allocated and distributed. And also, I put it in my report, in having regulatory bodies, telecommunication regulatory bodies that are truly and absolutely independent. They are technical bodies, but independent from governments in general. So that was the first aspect of my report, is to re-emphasize. We also run into traditional problems that we have, and I pointed there in freedom of expression that constitute, in some cases, the misuse of expression or legitimate limitations. And one of them is hate speech. And I point out to the cases of two forms of speech which are particularly relevant in elections. One is the homophobic speech, and we had 2 or 3 cases. Uganda was probably one of the worst scenarios on homophobic speech, where, interestingly enough, there were candidates making campaign speeches based on incitement to violence against LGBT population and harassment and attacks on LGBT population, and trying to define their, we would say in Spanish, machismo, their male sort of dominance and capacity to lead a country based on their attack on LGBT population. This is absolutely unacceptable. You cannot build a campaign, which should be a democratic campaign, on the exercise of hatred against a particular sector of the population, and specifically incitement to hostility and violence to this sector. I mentioned Uganda because it's one of the worst cases, but it happens everywhere, including Russia these days, where there's even legislation in terms of education and sexuality. And the second aspect of hate speech was the xenophobia against migrants. This is truly serious. In Europe, obviously you all have seen this happening, but I must confess that it's happening everywhere. The fear of foreigners, of people that are different, just because they have a different language, they come from a different region, because they're competing for jobs at a lower salary around the world due to the economic crisis, is provoking that many sort of very hardline parties are campaigning with the slogans that we will get rid of all the foreigners, we'll push the foreigners out, we will use violence against the foreigners, we will detain the foreigners and treat them as criminals. They never say it exactly in those words, but this is the message. So we have a dehumanizing form of speech. I say in my report that it's absolutely legitimate that every nation have a migratory policy and immigration laws that should be kept. I understand that perfectly well. But this doesn't mean that we can dehumanize the treatment of anyone. Even migratory laws have to treat migrants with decency and with respect, and especially with respect to their human rights. They're not criminals, they're not terrorists, they're not attacking a nation. They have to be seen as individuals who will be processed in an administrative way, not in a criminal way, and not jailed because they trespassed a border or frontier. So this was the other aspect of the incitement to violence being used with electoral purposes, and I must say tragically used very successfully, because we see a lot of hardline political parties gaining momentum and gaining positions on the basis of this sort of strong anti-human speeches and provocation and incitement to hostility against other human groups. These were like I said, the traditional aspects. And the second big traditional aspect of freedom of expression, which should be highlighted in electoral communication, is the protection of journalists. I have written reports. My report to the council last year was on the need to protect journalists, not only because of the defense of their freedom of expression, but it's also especially for the defense of the right to access information that society has. And the access to information of society will depend on a free press and a pluralistic press. And this is, again, we go back to pluralism. So defending the press has a legal part of it, to defend pluralism, to allow all forms of expression, to allow all forms of media, but it has a physical element and a physical responsibility because violence increases during electoral periods. There is an aggressiveness against the press, and many political parties or political leaders, especially those parties that have more of a fundamentalist religious connotation or a fundamentalist political position, tend to be very aggressive against the press that is critical of their positions. And oftentimes, journalists run a risk by covering the electoral process. So we said, having full information of candidates, platforms, promises, the biographies of those competing for power, or any other information is only guaranteed if full access and secure access is guaranteed to journalists. This is a key topic. Again, I insist this is a permanent topic for all states. Permanently, journalists should be protected. We had a couple of side events in Geneva this week on that, promoted by Austria, that and there was a question whether journalists have more rights than others, and the response was no. Journalists have exactly the same rights as any other person, but what we're protecting here is the function of journalists. That the protection of the press, to have a free press, is a guarantee for society of being informed. The same way that the protection for human rights defenders is not because they are a different type of individual with more rights, but it's because of the function of promoting and defending human rights, which is crucial for any society. So this element was left very clear there as well. Now, what were the crucial recommendations which were new in this report? Number one is the question of transparency. First, I discovered that this deals with access to information. It was part of the mandate report. The transparency, obviously, should be on the funding of campaigns. And this is something I found enormous preoccupation around the world, from Africa to Thailand to the US, for instance, because there's a deregulation process in the US. Many NGOs are looking at the fact that the deregulation should not mean, probably against deregulation, but should not mean necessarily anonymity of donations to campaign, because that becomes very dangerous. In societies of Central America, like my own, and I can say this freely because it's my own country, so I'm free to criticize it, we have a serious problem by the penetration of organized crime into the political life. So, and this is so absurd that it's even mentioned in the press. It's the common gossip. We have a candidate, which today, by the way, is the leading candidate for the next elections, which everyone knows has been funded by organized crime. He was a candidate the last time for 4 years at a campaign, and he will be a candidate for the next time, which means he has been campaigning for 4 more years. Who can campaign for 8 years constantly without a job, because he dedicates his time full time, with enormous amount of publicity from billboards painted on the roadside to huge ads in the newspapers or television? The expense of 8 years of campaign is enormous. That can only be subsidized by illicit funds. This is very dangerous for a country. We have mayors that have been put in jail because they were discovered to be part of a drug cartel in some regions, especially in the border areas with Mexico, where there's a traffic of drugs by land. So it is a very serious problem, the question of campaign financing. And of course we don't want to limit campaign financing, and we don't want to tell, or I don't want to tell as a mandate holder, what method the states should have. But I do want to apply the principle of transparency. So what I left very clear in the report is that all funding should be reported. And for me, the best way, and this was a debate in all the consultations, should parties be forced to report to the public? should freedom of information laws be applied to parties. I believe this is legitimate. I believe that political parties are public institutions, like any other institution of the state. They operate in the political public sphere, and they are a vehicle to political politics. But I found that was not practical. It is valid as a principle, but that's not practical. It's not so easy for a journalist or any citizen to walk into a party and say, look, I want to see your books showing how much money you have received. So it was much better, and this is my recommendation in the report, to have the basic idea that all funding should be reported to the electoral authority, according to the legislation of every country, but it should be a periodic form of reporting. How often, how frequent, every country will have the legislation. But there should be a periodic form of reporting, not only the amounts that were being funded, but the sources of the funds. Where are these funds coming from? And once they're in the hands of the electoral authority, they should become accessible to the broad public, as public information in the hands of the state. And there's no reason why that, and this for me seemed to be the most practical method of doing it. Now, one of the other recommendations is that not all support for campaigns comes in cash, comes in monetary form. Some donations, and this again I'm using the example of my own country, are done in kind, in space of television, in time and radio. And this becomes very important. So again, when you have massive accumulation of media and huge consortiums of the world, a Rupert Murdoch, for instance, where you have this sort of concentration of different forms of media, then it is very easy to begin negotiating with who are going to be the next parliament, the next legislators, and begin striking deals. In my country, for instance, we just had the example, Congress passed by national emergency with only one vote the new telecommunications law, in which it prolonged the concession of frequencies from 15 to 25 years for free, with no cost at all, and just that can be renovated just with an exchange of letters between the concessionaries and the state. Now it turns out that the concessionaries is one person who owns all 4 channels of television. So obviously, and by the way, had huge majority in Parliament. Why? Because this man very intelligently gives free space to all parties, not only to one. But he does it in the form of negotiation. Everyone writes sort of a certain commitment with him, and he has the documents to back that up. So obviously, this is as undemocratic as an electoral process can be. So this was very important. I said the transparency of all forms of donation, whether it be in monetary form or whether it be in kind through space in any form of media. It can be written media, it can be telecommunications and all that. One of the comments, the only comment that I got is that there was not enough on internet, and this is true. I didn't deal, although I've written so much about internet and the freedom of the net, for 2 reasons. One is because, like I said, 80% of the information that people use for electoral processes comes from television today. I think it's a generational question. I think the next generation will probably change that. But in this moment, this is the reality. But secondly, because an internet is very difficult to regulate. Anyone can use internet for free, and anyone can promote a tweet. And one of the biggest problems is that initially many of the comments and tweets were coming from one individual, but now what used to be the call centers and making phone calls to a radio station now are the tweet centers, where you can have 100 people working for you, sending millions of tweets a day, giving the impression that you have many people commenting, and it's not real. No? So this is a problem that we'll have to deal with and let technology evolve and see. Not that we can limit it, because again, it is a form of free expression, and I will not limit the internet in any way, but that there should be some form of the public to be informed about that. And in the case of information, I finally deal with the polling institutions. I believe that polling is done all the time and should be done all the time. But in electoral periods, there should be again, an element of information of the methodology of the polling agency to give some credibility. So again, polling agencies should notify the electoral authority what their methodology, what type of a sample of individuals they have. Not that they should identify the individuals themselves, there's an element of privacy there, but that they should identify the type of sample of population that they're dealing with, and the methodology that they were using for polling. Because this can actually allow the population to try to verify the credibility of polling. And many countries have sort of what they call a polling curfew, which is in order not to affect the elections at the last moment, because a immediate poll right before the elections can have a determinant factor for undecided population. Some countries have a 24-hour prohibition of publication. You can make the polls, but you cannot publish the results. And some countries you have 3 days, up to, like Mexico has 72 hours, but many countries, most of the countries have at least 24 hours of non-publicity. Now, in the consultation in Spain, and I remember this very clearly, the example, a friend from Spain was saying, yes, we have a prohibition as well, but what happens in our country, and this is that you will have a poll and then they will publish it in the electoral newspaper of Andorra, which is not, it is not technically, it's not Spain, but it's right there, and everyone looks at the electronic newspaper of Andorra, you know, so, but I didn't have a solution for that. I mean, the Andorra newspaper was commenting about the elections in Spain and said, and we discovered that, you know. But my hope is that not very many people are accessing through internet the newspaper of Andorra. But anyway, there will always be a way to circumvent. But I think these measures of no polling results, I would actually encourage states to have 3 days, because I think it's important to have a time to verify the polls, and the people can confront the methodology and see if they're valid. And the second type of polling is the exit polls. And that again is a danger, because if you are publishing the day of the election, for instance, you publish the exit poll at noon of how the vote is going 4 hours after the polling booths were open, they were open at 8 and at 12 you make a publication, you can mark the elections, because people all of a sudden can see that so-and-so is winning the elections by a big margin. But that's not real, because voting has to deal with this type of schedule every family has, the distance from the polling booth, how close you are, how far you are, or if it's on a working day, what schedule do you have of working or not. So the idea is that yes, there could be exit polls, and they can be published, but never before the last voting booth was closed. So during the day of elections, they could never affect the result of those elections. I mean, the result of the elections have to be a very thorough process of reflection of the population with a huge amount of information about their candidates. It can't be a last-minute poll that will push opinion to one side or the other. These were very basic recommendations on the question of information being gathered and being pushed. There was another series of smaller things, but those were probably the most important. But I believe, then there was something about the strength. All this means that there should be strong electoral authorities, that there should be a strong education process, education for democracy, citizenship process, that elections are not determined just by the electoral period. In some countries are 3 months, some countries are 2 months, some countries are longer, but elections should be determined by the maturity of the population, how they can sort of develop their own ideas, their own thoughts, their own sympathies, their process. So there should be a permanent electoral process in motion from the state to all, especially, for instance, with children in schools, with the population in general, using media, but using media as an educational tool. And this will be very relevant. This was the end of my report. Probably the most important aspect, I think the most dramatic aspect of it is it's one thing I forgot. The transparency has one added element, which is, no one questioned it, by the way, in my presentation of my report, but I know that in my country this is becoming one of the most questionable things, is that the transparency should include the transparency of ownership of media. In order for the population, and this is a discussion I know that the European Commission is having, and the Council of Europe as well in Strasbourg was also having. They were trying to draft some guidelines, because for people to interpret the position that's presented by media, it's important to know who the owners are, because that way they know what the origin of that thought is. Not to condition content, not to get involved in the content, it's just to know who the owners up to the last personal name. As a matter of fact, I discovered that in Europe the debate is going further. I wouldn't go that far, I didn't put it that far, but the debate is going further to the extent that in some positions in Europe have it that there should be a disclosure of who are the biggest advertisement interests. Like anyone who has more than 10% of the income of a media by advertising also has a controlling interest, even if they're not owners. But they are so powerful in the economic influence to that media that even that should be identified by media. I would not put that just for practical, I think it's going far in the sense that you may have someone announcing that represents more than 10% of the income of the media, but for 1 month or in the next month they don't have it, or it becomes very, very cumbersome. But I think the ownership of the media is a legitimate question of disclosure. It's not a matter, it's not a breach of privacy. You're not asking them to reveal anything about themselves except their identity. And there is no reason why media, being a public element of knowledge and of information, should have secret owners. There's no reason to guarantee secrecy there. In terms of the paid publicity, and this was probably again the most controversial part, and some people criticize me of not being stronger than that, but that's more difficult. I presented the three models that there's countries that are deregulating to almost have no limitations, like the US. The Supreme Court is deregulating even the limits to personal contributions, which I think is very tragic. And there's countries like in Europe especially, where no paid publicity is allowed. Because the idea is that the public should be informed through the news media, the news coverage, and not through paid ads. And they were telling me the example in Britain, for instance, there was an environmental NGO that wanted to publish an ad against a candidate because he was in favor of urban development that would topple a forest in some areas. And even that was forbidden. Because although it was an environmental paid ad from an NGO, not even a political party, it was taking a position on elections. It was saying, don't vote for this candidate because we'll lose our forest. And it was during the electoral period. So the electoral authorities said, no, you can publish that before the electoral period or after, but not during the electoral period because we don't want paid publicity to mark the vote. I believe in principle. I think it is not money, it's not paid publicity that should determine the sympathies of the population for any party or candidate. Now, this is very controversial. So there's a third model, which is the one that Mexico just applied in their new legislation. It's very much around the world, but it's to give paid publicity to the electoral authority. Some people say it's difficult to guarantee our objective, but in Mexico they have a fund where 70% of the fund will be allocated in proportion to the vote of the past elections. And 30% of the fund will be allocated in equal parts to all participants. That would include even new parties and that would come into these elections, for instance. I think that's still open to debate, but I presented three models and at least I established the principle that it would be good countries consider under legislation the fact that it should not be the monetary element, the funding that would determine the vote by a higher amount of paid publicity, but it would be more to enhance the diversity and plurality of the media and the news coverage so everyone has an opportunity to be covered by the press. This is what is in my report. And by the way, just for information, many of the people that are here with me today and our institute demos from Guatemala, we're doing a consultation as well today on the next report, which is going to be Children and Freedom of Expression. I think that, again, we were trying to build into the future of what will become. I know that even the Human Rights, the Children's Rights Committee or Committee on the Rights of the Child is looking at communication with children as part of their right to participation of children. And this for us is very important because that's another issue that I've said from the beginning, that the freedom of expression is something that you learn. Not only a right that you have, which is true, we have a right, but you learn how to use it. And that means you learn by using it from the earliest ages and what are the conditions, and especially when we're dealing with the new technologies, with internet or mobile phones, there is an element of prevention and protection of children that is important to take into account. So that will be hopefully a next report, which I will try to draft, but will be presented by my successor to the General Assembly. Thank you very much.
We have 10-15 minutes, so for this office, there are questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Frank, for this very clear presentation. I would like to raise one question and have one comment. The first is regarding hate speech. And more precisely, have you found in your report efficient strategies in this regard? Because we all know how difficult it is to consider hate speech as a legitimate restriction on freedom of expression. It requires incitement, and especially in the United States, but also in Europe. We don't want to prosecute by criminal law some political discourse. So that's problematic, because if you start prosecuting these political persons and political parties for hate speech, they get more in the picture, and it seems they even get advantage out of that. If you don't do it, if you don't start reacting with legal tools, it becomes accepted. Also in the elections now of the 25th of May, we had some political party the days before the elections coming with very clear hate speech, but some journalists and media, a lot of political parties didn't react because they were afraid if we put the attention on that issue, that party will have more advantage of it. And one of the issues 2 days before the elections was that the chairman of the Vlaams Belang, a radical extreme party in Flanders, in Belgium, said the problem is not that people get older and that a large people of the population need to take care for an older generation. People get more grey. It's not that they get more grey is the problem, it's because the people get more brown in our country. That is the problem. And there was no reaction on that, because they were afraid, the media and other politicians, if we react on that, they get more in the attention than necessary. So my question is, have you found strategies in some countries which have shown to be efficient? Because I know that in many countries there are hesitations what the best way of reacting is. Not reacting, or reacting by prosecution, criminal law with the legal tools, which in some cases can be appropriate. And my second is more a reflection on opinion polls. Many countries in Europe indeed have these restrictions, prohibitions, for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Belgium had 30 days. Also in France, they had a longer period. It's difficult to enforce these prohibitions, because in France you could go to the websites of Swiss newspapers who had the polls. But apart from that, there's always circumvention. That's not a sufficient reason why you shouldn't have a principle. I have my doubts on the principle, and if understood well, you were a bit in favor of supporting short delay of reporting the results of opinion polls, because the research on this social research shows that you have very different effects. You have bandwagon effect, you have underdog effect, it can lead to tactical voting. It is one of the information elements that the electorate has to determine their choice. So there's nothing wrong with that, it's just additional information. The core problem is that you have to make that your opinion polls are under some quality control, that the methodology is transparent. So it's better, I would say, to improve the quality of opinion polls than to restrict the public communication about the results. I would like to have your reflection on that issue as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Two very important questions. On the hate speech, you are right. When I wrote my report on hate speech, it's one of the most difficult reports, because like you say, in freedom of expression, what you want to enhance is the openness. And I always say that the limitations should be seen as exceptions, and very, very limited exceptions. So the openness should prevail. But that doesn't mean that exceptions can never occur. What it means is that we have to have criteria to qualify when they're legitimate. The first point I made there, Article 20 of ICCPR says prohibit, doesn't say penalize, for one. Doesn't mean that necessarily prohibition should be applied to criminal law. There can be other forms, like can there be the banning of a program or the limitation of time, or there can be a civil action by a court demanding an apology if there is something very serious said to a particular social group. But the criteria, I worked this in my report very closely with Article 19, the NGO, and trying to establish a criteria with a very high level benchmark, which the only country that did not agree with me was the US, of course, because of the First Amendment. And I do believe that the Americans have a valid question in terms of they have a higher standard of freedom of expression than any other country in terms of their legislation. But they do go further into allowing, for instance, racist speech that would violate the CERD, the Convention on the Elimination of Racism and Discrimination, on Article 4. Like, for instance, the Ku Klux Klan is legal. It's a legal organization. Because the only threshold that cannot be passed in the US is the threshold of violence. No one can incite violence. And violence has to occur to actually become a prohibition. So, for me, that's taking it a little bit further than most of the other countries. But what were the criteria, if I recall correctly, presented in my report was that in order to establish one, because not any comment, even a silly comment, even an offensive comment can be qualified as hate speech. There has to be, the element of incitement is that it moves society or a social group to do something wrong. And I believe in violence, but I also believe in discrimination. I mean, you can also say, yes, all these people, because of their color or their skin, should receive half a salary. That may not be physical direct violence, but it is an element of a serious violation of human rights. Or harsher, they should have harsher jobs than others, which is happening in several Middle East countries, for instance. All the manual work is doing by migrant workers. This sort of element. So, the 5 elements to establish the threshold was number one was intent. There has to be the intentionality to harm and to incite some harm, like violence or discrimination. It's not just any in-passing comment or anger that anyone may have after a game or a football game or something, but it has to be really the intentionality of maintaining this incitement. Secondly is the content of the message. The content and the extent. I mean, how harsh is the content and how broadly is the message extended. If I'm speaking to one other person, that would not constitute incitement to hate speech, although it may be offensive speech. But I said in my report, the state does not have the obligation to protect individuals from offense, but only from harm, and from the real harm. Thirdly, there has to be a real harm. Should be imminent and possible, and secondly, should be imminent. So real harm should be able to happen. So if you are talking to a crowd of people that are already irate for some reason, whether leaving a game or because there's tensions in the border or because there's tensions against a social group, and you send a message to them, this can actually provoke them into, which was the case of the Radio Mille Collines in Rwanda. It's not just that the message was let's go and kill all the Tutsis, but the message was done already in moments of tension, where it was very easy to inflame the population. So it deals with the possibility of harm and the imminence of harm. It has to be not something that will happen in 10 years. And finally, the context. It has to be in a context of tension or in a context of possibility. Those were the elements, the basic elements put into establishing the highest standard, because I agree with you. We don't want to go around even dread, like for instance, a politician could say, yes, our economy is in crisis because all the migrant people we have. That would be a legitimate discourse, and they could say it. But it's not the same as he would say, then we have to arrest them and throw them into the ocean. We have to begin if you see someone of X color, you should push him out and meet him in the street, or there are differences in the message. And I also agree that it's very difficult in the concept of political debate, because as much as one dislikes those positions, it is legitimate to have those extreme right-wing positions and sort of elitist positions that many parties have. In terms of the polling, I also agree with you. I think that the banning of publication should only happen in a very short period before the election, because there's no chance to verify the credibility of the poll. That's the only reason. So I would not agree with the 30, I knew about the 30-day period. I don't see why there's any reason to ban any polls if you can actually, if the electoral authority can verify the methodology, and there can be some transparency in the methodology and who paid for the poll, and the funding for the poll. Fine, they could publish it, and you can have another poll from someone else. That's part of the debate. The only reason why to have either the 24 hours before or the 72 hours before is because I think in this last period, if the elections are going to be on Sunday, for instance, and you have 72 hours, that means that it will only ban the publication of the poll. Not even the polling, you can still do the polling, but you can't publish it on Thursday and Friday. You're effectively, well, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, but you're effectively banning for the last days that you will not be able to verify the polls. Because the problem is that anyone could invent a poll at the last moment, just to move this undecided opinion. And there will be no, of course, there are countries that are very resourceful, with very effective, but since my report goes to the entire world, the world has weak funding for electoral authorities, so there's not the capacity of verification in such a short period. That's the only reason. In my country, to cite an example, for instance, I found that many polling agencies never lie, but what they do is they publish only those aspects of the poll that are convenient for the candidate, and oftentimes leave candidates out of the poll, or the type of questions they would, no one knows exactly the questions they ask the people, so the type of questions can vary the result. So this is all important to know, what questions were asked, what was included, and did you publish the whole result of the poll, or did you leave part of it out? And this is a tricky way to handle statistics.
Thank you so much for the presentation. So I would like to shift the attention to Brazil.
To?
Brazil. Because the Brazilian elections are coming up, and
There's no need to shift the attention to Brazil. We are all.
Very concentrated.
So the Brazilian elections are going up, and I would like to know what's the media atmosphere, like what's the media coverage, and
What is the one? Excuse me?
media coverage on Brazil, on the Brazilian political elections, and if there's some political influence or the standard of freedom of expression in Brazil, and what kind of education are Brazilians getting in order to make important decisions on the political sphere. And then we know that Brazil is one of the BRICS countries, so the political sphere then can impact the economy of the whole world. Thanks.
Yeah. No.
Let's take final round,
Yes.
so
Yes, please.
there's some more. We take a final round, so.
Yes, you say it from the
Yeah,
last.
okay.
No, in relation to the poll aspect, because you say it's important to verify the validity of the poll and you need time for that, but I think it's also extremely important to have certain type of control and transparency mechanisms when reporting about a poll, because you can have enough time, 30 days, even months, to verify the validity of the poll, but then the people reporting the results of a poll should also be responsible enough regarding what they are going to report, and I think they do have much more power. So the poll can be done by university, can be neutral and very objective, but then how the results are presented to the public, and you also lose lots of control in social media, and I think that's also dangerous. People can keep information from a valid poll and make it public through social media at a very late stage. So I do understand there are many mechanisms that you can use, but I'm also advocating a lot for education of the population. I think it's essential that the people can be critical, and they can have also their own resources to verify resources. And also, relating to your comment, I also live in Belgium, and I'm dark. And I also was very afraid of the comments made by Philip de Winter. So what we are doing with several of my friends, we are a group of Latin women, what you could call highly educated Latin women living in Belgium, but we are also victims of these racist comments. So we are doing a lot ourselves through social media, so even Facebook, we are publishing our opinions about this. And now we are organizing socially with a group of highly educated dark women in Belgium to try to write an article, a reply to this Philip de Winter, and telling them, yes, well, it's a problem being darker, it's a problem that you bring PhDs to Belgium, that you bring also a lot of intellectual capacity to Belgium. It's coming also a lot from that, but you need to have the resources. And we're a group of people and a group of women who are willing to fight this and to do it, but you have lots of people who don't have the resources, and a lot of the racist discourse and all this manipulation of the political discourse comes, and it's possible because the population is so ignorant, and they buy it. So if you don't start with children, if you don't start with media education, if you don't start making people reflexive of being able to understand a message, process it, and being critical, I think so a lot of investment should be paid in education and investing in children. And I really think like that's key in many ways. I mean, people interpret media messages by being reflective, by being creative, and having the capacity to react also as from a bottom-up approach.
Thank you. Maybe it's the last little thing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was intrigued when you, by the start, when you said the internet is still not a major source of influencing election periods, with the exception of the US, perhaps. So I just wanted to go on a bit further on that. So you have not seen any evidence of the Obama big data campaign becoming a more general trend throughout the world? Because if I then listen to your recommendations, they are all focused or in the context of the traditional mass media, I would say. Whereas I understand why in the US they deregulate these rules, because the threat there comes more from targeting people on an individual basis rather than through mass media. And I was just curious about your opinion about how to tackle such individualized influencing through big data tools.
That's a very important question you're asking. Let me answer. I apologize, but I'm not going to be able to qualify Brazil because the study did not go country by country qualifying how credible the media or the information was. Two things that I have done in the case of Brazil is basically follow the debate on internet. And I must say that it's one of the most interesting countries because it's the one country that has been able to institutionalize. We always talk about multi-stakeholder dialogue for internet. And everyone talks about the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum. But the Internet Governance Forum does not make decisions and not even make statements. There's a final statement by the chairman of the meeting, but it's not a consensus report. So the only country that took the multi-stakeholder dialogue and made it into an institution is Brazil, the CGI, the Comité Gestor de Internet, CGI.br, because they also are the domain registration for .br addresses. And I think it's been very successful. And it began from the academic sector, which I think was very good because they were not necessarily interested parties. And so it was the academic sector dealing with internet, who then brought in civil society, corporations, the state. And it's worked. It has worked, and it has worked very well. They established the 10 principles for internet, and they established sort of principles for public policy, and then they drafted a law, which has just recently, I was in the Net Mundial meeting in Sao Paulo, and the Senate had just approved the law, which is the Ley de Marco Civil, the civil framework law on internet, which is the most progressive law on internet, because regulating internet becomes very tricky. In the case of internet, I'm more in favor of not regulating because I think it's very difficult to regulate, except with the exceptional, very serious cases of harm like child pornography or issues like that. But in general, I believe that internet should be a very free space. But the law in Brazil actually defends the neutrality, the universality of the internet, and I think this is crucial. So my feeling is that now there's a big debate going on with media and all global, in terms of children, by the way, on the, I'm thinking in Spanish, but the clasificación indicativa, which is the new law, which is a law that establishes a form of symbolic regulation that will be self-implemented by the media, but it has a principal regulation on how to use little symbols to qualify programs in response to protecting children, and according to the content and different elements. And this is why it will be a self-regulation model, because the media will apply it to themselves. But even that is being contested by a lot of the media because they want no regulation on protecting children, which is very difficult to accept. On the electoral process, I don't know. That's why I didn't mention elections and information in Brazil. On the polling, the polling, I agree. I think polling agencies are a very interesting phenomenon and are part of political science. And our polling elements actually allow people to have a deeper reflection. So I don't want to sound as if I'm critical of polling. On the contrary, I think polling opinions in the public is very important. But again, we have to be able to verify the quality of the poll. And I think that is the role of the electoral authority. Not to have a standard of quality, yes or no, but more to have at least information on the methodology. It depends on how big a size of the sample was taken. Most pollsters would say any poll of about 1,000 individuals, and if you get to 1,500, you will have almost a perfect poll with a +3, -3 margin of error. Fine, but that depends on the diversity of the sample that you can get. So those are the basic issues. So what I think, this is why I don't agree with banning publication of polling for a long period of time, because they do give elements of reflection to the population. Because polling can not only be a question of sympathy for individuals, it can also be on topics. What is the crucial topic for the population that will vote this year? Perfect. This is important to know. Is poverty, is unemployment, is it national security? What are the issues? So I want to make it very clear that I'm not against polling at all. I think it is a very important element of social research and political science. The only point is the transparency. That's the only issue that I'm insisting. And banning the publication of polls before the election is because you can't have the time to verify. Some people will say this is why it may be interesting to ban it only 24 hours. Fine, and not 3 days. But I only mentioned the 24 hours and the 3 days and the 72 hours. I don't think more than 3 days makes any sense to have I think 3 days is legitimate in some countries. Now, you must understand that you're talking, I mean, we're sitting in Florence at the European University. If you're doing a poll and you're publishing it in Bangladesh, it's very different, because will the population of Bangladesh have the chance and opportunity to verify a poll? I think it's very difficult. The voting process in India took a week, because you had hundreds of millions of people voting. So in the context, we have to look at the world as a whole. So I think that's where I put the responsibility on the state. The electoral authority has a responsibility to be the verifying body of the quality of the process. This is not of the results. I'm not getting into the content, but of the quality of the process. And inform the people, because we're not even saying that the electoral authority has to approve a polling agent. Just simply has to inform the people, that's all. The transparent, because I don't want to put too much regulation, because then you will be limiting the research and the publication. And secondly, I fully agree with you on the question of education. Education is crucial. That's why I say that electoral authorities for me are normally active for the elections and the day of the voting. I think they should be active all the time in building citizenship in the electoral processes. And then things like the comment could not happen. I'm very pleased to see that you're reacting, but Imagine if you have women that are highly educated reacting to this hardline right-wing leader in Belgium, what will happen to women that are not highly educated?
That's the point. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
people don't
it-
have the opportunities, they don't see that, they don't grasp it because they are not here.
Exactly.
So,
And I think it is important to share with everyone, I mean, to take a position publicly against this candidate. Because these are the issues, I mean, in some cases, I mean, countries are, I mean, I think the financial crisis always moves, I should make a comment on that, but anyway, financial crisis always moves countries to a hardline position. This was the origin of the Second World War. So we must be very careful about living in a financial crisis with high levels of unemployment. Because the people will want to explain their unemployment in different ways and will want to find someone to blame. And this is very tragic because oftentimes it's the system to blame and not individuals. And on the question of internet, I fully agree with you. My last report to the Human Rights Council in June my last report to the General Assembly was on the right to know the truth about human rights violations, which deals with state access to information in the hands of the state, and with whistleblowers and the non-liability of whistleblowers of public officials who are willing to denounce human rights violations. But in June it was on privacy, and the right to privacy and freedom of expression before Snowden. And it was a week before Snowden, so a week later it became a very discussed report. And little did I know all this was going to happen, but the point I make in the report is that privacy and freedom of expression are two very distinct rights, but they go hand in hand, because if you do not enjoy privacy, you feel intimidated to exercise your freedom of expression. And that could be valid for individuals as it can be valid for the press, confidentiality of the press, of the sources of your material, etc. So this is very important. So you are right in the sense there's a new element here, and it's just being discussed. Can you use internet for a targeted messaging process? I just recently discovered, because initially what we had of information is that there have been donations requested through internet, which I think is legitimate, and that through small donations they were able to raise more money than through big corporations, which was the opposing party position. I think that's valid. But if it was not only request of donations or sending global messages out to the public, but it was actually targeting groups, because there's a process of profiling the groups and identifying their priorities and their interests, then you fall into the question of privacy. Are social networks losing the element of privacy? Is it easy to do profiling? And I have an interesting example that I always point out. I work very closely with many NGOs that are dealing in the US and abroad, but there's one NGO in particular, a friend from South Africa, that works with APC, Advanced Association for Progressive Communication. And she was telling me she's a little bit on the heavy side. She's not fat, but heavy. And she opened her account in one of the social networks and put her photograph there. But she says, I'm a very happy person. I'm very happy with myself. She has never gone on a diet, never subscribed to any products, never been in the gym. She says, I'm an academic. I like what I do. And all of a sudden she began getting bombarded with all this advertisement of diet pills, special diets for you. And she says, what worries me, Frank, she says, is that if I would have been a subscriber to these products, I could understand that they were doing a market analysis and they were through the marketing process, but I never did that. So this takes me to say that the profiling is not only in the content, but also in the photographs. They saw my photo, they saw this chubby face on there, and they said, she needs a diet, no? And they began bombarding her. This is very dangerous, she said. This is very tragic, because what are we doing with it? And I'm not going to get into this discussion today, but there's a recent court decision in Europe on the question of the right to be forgotten.
Yeah.
Can you erase? Yeah, I know. I'm sure that you're all debating this here. That's why I'm not going to get into it. But is there a possibility of erasing history. I mean, people, this is part of the education process, I think, with people. What do you upload in the first place to the internet? Anyway, but this would be my response to it. I think there are many things. And in campaigning, that's going to be the new, I think internet will play a key role. It's not yet, but it will take, because the other thing is we're looking at countries where there's very little access. When I did my report on internet and was talking about access to internet, the fastest growing accessibility program was in China. They had 375 million people interconnected, which only represents the 30% of the population of China, but that in itself, for the size of that country, is a big chunk of people. And what was interesting is it had the fastest growing, but I always said access deals with content and with connectivity and equipment. So what China was doing is the connectivity and equipment at a very cheap price. But the content, no, content goes, all of the content to the party. You only read and you can only see an internet what the party allows. India, which was for me the opposite example, a very free society and even freer, this was a report I did in 2010, now they have more regulations. In those days it was even more, very open society, was full content in terms of internet, high technology and technological development investigation. India is a superpower in research, but only 7% of the population was interconnected. Now they have reached 10%, but even 10% for India is very, very important. So, can internet play a key role for elections? Not yet. Not with only 10% of the population interconnected in a big superpower like India.
Okay, I think
Thank you.
we're very happy for this very fascinating speech. Thank you very much.